joining us for today's briefing. I'm Jaya. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Students for Uyghurs wing of the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign alongside Eve. I'm also a co-executive director of Yet Again, which is a youth-led organisation focused on raising awareness of modern atrocity. So today's event is really an opportunity to find out more about the Genocide Amendment, what it will do and why it's so important that it gets passed. You'll be able to learn from and hear from two speakers who we're so honoured to have with us. We have Michael Pollock, who's a barrister practising in human rights, criminal and international law at Church Court Chambers. Michael is a director at Justice Abroad, which helps people who need assistance dealing with legal proceedings overseas. Michael is also on the advisory committee of the World Uyghur Congress London office and undertakes work for the World Uyghur Congress and Uyghurs and their families who have been subject to disappearance and arbitrary detention. We also have with us today Joe Collins. Joe is co-executive director of Yet Again, a youth-led initiative raising awareness of modern atrocity, and he's working on the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign alongside Michael. Joe is currently undertaking a master's in law, having completed his undergraduate degree at the University of York. Joe's undergraduate dissertation critically reviewed the crime of genocide, and Joe combines his passion for genocide prevention and international criminal law to provide insights into what must change for modern atrocity to be adequately challenged. So throughout the session, we will be taking questions. So please just raise your hand or pop it in the chat box and we will ask as and when they come through. But for now, I think we'll kick off. Eve, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, also if you have any questions you want to ask and you don't want to ask them, you can DM either me or Jaya and we will ask them for you. So the first question is to Michael. Thank you very much for joining us. Can you sort of like give us a little summary of like what the situation is like on the ground in the Uyghur region?
Thank you very much for having me. It's fantastic to see so many young people interested in the issue. It's been a very interesting issue in regards to the Uyghur and other Turkish minorities who've been subject to the most brutal repression for some time. That when I first became involved in this issue, there wasn't much in the press about it, and this was only a few years ago. And now more and more people are interested, so that's fantastic. So it's great to see young people interested in what you're doing. In regards to the Uyghurs, there is a multitude of repression against them. I'll go through some of it. In regards to what I do, I'm a barrister and I act in international human rights cases. I've been doing work today on Taiwan and work in Somalia as well. But it's fantastic to be back on the Uyghur issue, which is an issue very close to my heart. And before we answer what's happening to the Uyghurs, we should speak about who they are. They're an ethnically Turkish people with a unique Central Asian lifestyle. They have their own language, their own culture, and their own history. We should also remember one thing, I think, when we're talking about repression in Xinjiang area, it's not just the Uyghur people. There's other ethnically Turkish Muslim people there as well. So there's Uzbeks there, there's a big Uzbek community, there's Tajiks, there's Kazakhs, and they're also being subject to this brutal repression as well. The Uyghurs are the biggest of the Turkish groups, so that's why people talk about the Uyghurs the most. There are these other groups, and some of the clients that we have at Justice Abroad are actually part Uyghur and part Uzbek. So there's lots of mixing between the different cultures there as well. And we're talking about a region, a huge region in the northwest of China, where these people all live. What's happening to them? There's attempts to eradicate their culture. And when you try to eradicate someone's culture, you get rid of the things they care about. So the demolition of mosques, banning of their literature, banning of their language and the teaching of their language as well, removal of children so they don't learn their own culture, and they're brainwashed away from their culture as well. And then what you've all heard about would be the mass arbitrary detention in camps, which has been really worrying as well. And within those camps, there's evidence of torture, there's evidence of all kinds of offences against them. And even some Uyghurs and other Turkish people have died in those camps as well. So it's a really terrible thing that we're watching happening. In regards to the camps, an interesting thing in regards to those is that when people started talking about these camps, and there's been lots of scholars who were identifying evidence that these camps were in existence, and this was probably about 1.5 years ago. Things such as buying mass cattle prods to use to herd people into camps and this kind of thing. And at first, you'll all remember, or I hope you do, China said that they're not there, they're not happening. And then they really attacked those scholars who came out with this information and said, well, there's these camps there. There's some fantastic young, this is just a side note, there's some fantastic young people who did lots of work on that as well. There's a guy in Japan who did lots of satellite work, working out where the camps were, did fantastic work there. And then the experts were saying, well, there's 1 million people in these camps, and the Chinese rubbished that as well, and they attacked the people who said there's millions of people there. But then recently they've said that they've admitted 1.3 million every year passing through these camps. So it's the most brutal repression. And in regards to genocide that we'll be talking about today, the main kind of things you have to look out for: repression of births of Uyghurs and other Turkish Muslim people, so forced abortions, this kind of thing, and forced sterilization. That's what you're really looking for with genocide. But it's just a multitude, any kind of international crime. You can think about torture, crimes against humanity, arbitrary detention in these mass camps. It's all happening to the Uyghur people and the other Turkish people there as well.
Thank you, Michael. Joe, I'm going to move on to you now. Why has what is happening to the Uyghurs not yet been recognised as a genocide by majority, if not most, of the international community?
Okay, so this is a really important question and actually comes at the heart of why we are pushing for this amendment. Now, before we get on to prevention and punishment and so forth, we need to recognise that states have an obligation to prevent and punish genocide. That is outlined in the Genocide Convention. It's an international obligation on each individual state. Now, to engage that obligation to prevent and punish genocide, you must first identify that genocide. Now, moving on to Jay's point about why hasn't this genocide been recognised, and Michael has outlined these horrific and atrocious crimes that are being committed right now as we are holding this call. And there are a number of reasons why this isn't the case. Ordinarily, you would expect cases such as these to either go before the International Criminal Court or, in a contentious case, before the International Court of Justice. And we've heard this time and again from the government, it's for international courts to make this determination. Neither of those courts have the jurisdiction to hear this case and therefore make a determination. I'd like to briefly turn to the International Criminal Court first. The International Criminal Court is fundamentally treaty-based. It arises out of the Rome Statute, and parties to that statute are able to have their cases heard. So, for example, if you are signatory to the Rome Statute, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction. China is not a signatory to the statute. Alternatively, the ICC may exercise jurisdiction if the UN Security Council makes a referral to the International Criminal Court. Now, China is on the Security Council and has the power of veto. So any attempt at a UN Security Council referral would be vetoed. That means all avenues to the International Criminal Court are blocked by China. Turning now to the International Court of Justice. To hear the case, the International Court of Justice must have the consent of both parties to that case. So it involves China consenting to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And this is something it simply won't do. China's approach to international arbitration is to have very limited international arbitration when it comes to judicial matters. So both of the key courts where you would expect this determination to happen are blocked.
Thank you very much, Joe. So questions for both Michael and for Joe, but we'll start with Michael, is what is, can you explain what the Genocide Amendment is, sort of like in broad terms?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got it on my screen. I can put it up there in a moment so people can have a look at it. But what the Genocide Amendment does, in short, is it allows our High Court to make a determination on genocide. And this will get around those problems that Joe's just properly identified. in the international sphere, there's not really many options to look at in regards to what the People's Republic of China is carrying out against the Uyghur people at the moment. So this would get around that to some extent, because it would allow our High Court to make a determination about whether genocide is happening in that region or in other countries for that matter. Once they did that, they would make a report and they would make a determination, and then the matter would be referred to both houses of Parliament, and they would have to decide what they wanted to do with any trade deal that had been concluded or any trade deal which was about to be concluded. It wouldn't force them to rip up those trade deals, but it would at least have the matter discussed in both houses of Parliament. But really, one of the key aims from it would be a legal determination by an objective, fair tribunal, which is our High Court, about genocide taking place, which would be fantastic. I don't know if I should pop the amendment up on the screen so people can have a bit of a look at it. I think I'm not sure if my screen is I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share my screen. I am now. Let me pop it up here. So you can have a bit of a look at it there. It looks kind of complicated, but it's not really. It's very, very simple. It's looking at, it says our court, so the High Court, if it's brought in England, of course you could bring a case in Scotland or in Northern Ireland as well, can make a preliminary determination. Then another signatory, another state is committing genocide in breach of the Genocide Convention. As Joe was talking about there, the Genocide Convention sets out the rules about genocide in regard, and sets out the definition of genocide there. And then if you look down at paragraph 4 of the amendment, that's the important one there. It says, when this preliminary determination is made, a Minister of the Crown must, in a reasonable period, make arrangements for a motion to be debated in both houses of Parliament. And the government will set out its course of action relating to a trade agreement, and that can include discontinuation of negotiations towards it, withdrawal or termination of that agreement. You can see there, it's paragraph 4, which is the important one there. So it is really, it really is a simple amendment. It makes a lot of sense. And it would have the United Kingdom as a world leader in regards to recognition of genocides. And I think it's very important. And the government might say, oh, well, we're not going to enter into a trade deal with China. But we've seen the European Union very recently agree a investment treaty with China, in which human rights play have a very backseat role. I think the only commitment they got to human rights was that China will commit to considering committing to human rights. It's really weak. So go and have a look at that as well. So if the EU is doing it, then it is potential that there's potential that our government could do something similar as well. I think it's very important for that reason.
There is one thing I just would quickly add, and this is in response to Anushka's question on the chat about these countries avoiding accountability via the courts. That is exactly what's happening internationally for the reasons I explained. What the amendment would do is allow the UK to recognise genocide. At the moment, it is the policy of successive Labour and Conservative governments that genocide determination, the recognition of genocide isn't a political decision. And, Michael explained why it's not a political decision. You don't want to question the credibility of that determination. It's for courts. Now, in most circumstances, international courts can make that determination. But as the Uyghur genocide is exemplifying, it's not possible at the moment internationally. So the only courts left are domestic courts. And that's what this amendment does. It allows the UK High Court, a domestic court, to apply international law, assess the evidence, and make that determination. And that around this loophole, this gap internationally of avoiding recognition. We can recognise it, courts can recognize it.
Thank you so much. Joe, you just froze up a little bit at the end. Do you want to just repeat what you were saying just right at the end?
Maybe I'll jump in. I see a very good question there by Anushka, who says, isn't the nature of the very countries who would commit acts of genocide, brutal repression, that they would avoid being held accountable by these courts? Is there a way around it? That's a fantastic question. And yes, there is. And that's what the Genocide Amendment does. It would allow groups to bring a case before the High Court for evidence to be properly considered by the High Court and for them to make a determination. Now, countries like China, and we can all think of other states as well who may be involved in genocidal conduct, could turn up in the High Court. They could instruct counsel, they could put evidence forward saying, well, actually, we're not involved in genocide. Whether they would or not, who knows? But at least what you'd end up with would be a proper legal determination about whether genocide has taken place. And at the moment, you'll see Boris Johnson won't call it genocide. Dominic Raab won't call it genocide as well. And they're very wary not to call it genocide. And you may wonder, why is that? But as Joe's been explaining, the Genocide Convention provides lots of obligations for a state. So as soon as they say it is genocide, our politicians, then they're bound by those obligations to take action. And so we think a determination by a court, and it should be coming from a court. Genocide is a legal matter. It's a legal definition, so it should be a court doing it. It is very important for those reasons.
A question from Helena to everyone is sort of, how was this issue not foreseen when the court structure was initially set up, and was there a misguided assumption that nobody on the Security Council would commit genocide? So like, how did this issue come about?
The Security Council was set up right after World War II, when we all dreamed of a better world. We saw what happened in World War II, and we thought everyone was going to come together. And it was set up with the Security Council of with China and Russia and the UK and the US, all involved there, and France as well. But it hasn't always turned out like that. Politics change. The way people behave change as well. So in regards to international criminal, not the International Criminal Court, but I'm talking about in regards to the ability to create ad hoc tribunals. So you had the Yugoslavia Tribunal, the Rwanda Tribunal, they all came from the Security Council. The Security Council, under Chapter 7, to protect peace and security, set up these tribunals. So we can't have one coming through the Security Council because China would veto it every time. And they didn't veto, they abstained in the creation of those two tribunals I spoke about. You can have tribunals created by the General Assembly. And in the General Assembly, as I understand, and Joe might know more about this, I think you just need a majority of states to vote for it. So the Sierra Leone Tribunal was a General Assembly tribunal rather than a Security Council. I'm not sure whether that was to get around the veto, and it probably was. So there is potential that you could have a tribunal set up by the General Assembly. And what's been really interesting is seeing the numbers kind of shift around a bit, because there was a really strong resolution put forward by China in regards to what they were doing in Xinjiang a few years ago, and they had a huge majority. But over the last few years, it's come back again and again before the General Assembly, and the numbers are starting to even out a little bit. China has immense international reach now, because whilst we've been sitting on our hands, they've been investing in countries all over the world, and they own big parts of infrastructures of countries all throughout Africa, throughout Latin America, and throughout Asia as well. So they have a huge amount of support there, and countries are stuck in a kind of debt cycle to China, so they can't really do anything to upset them. So that's the kind of UN created tribunals. Security Council, it's not going to happen. People can talk about restructuring the Security Council. I agree with them all day. Although the difficult thing with restructuring the Security Council is you have to get past the veto to restructure it. So if you're just going to have a qualified majority of the Security Council instead of the permanent members being able to veto, I think that would be a great thing, perhaps. But that's not going to happen either. General Assembly, maybe one day, that when the balance kind of shifts away from China. In regards to the International Criminal Court, that was formed on the basis of consent. So it was about states joining and consenting to it. We've been very lucky, actually, because so many states have, and more are joining than are leaving. So it's becoming bigger. The reach is widening. There are some states that really should join. States like the United States of America, I think that would have a really big effect if they joined, to show, you know, where our personnel, our people are willing to submit to this as well. Who knows? Biden's not said anything about this. There's been lots of fanfare about his liberal credentials in all different areas. So let's see how that moves, because under Trump they passed, you would have heard, they passed a law which criminalized people who worked with the International Criminal Court. International Criminal Court's an international institution. It was a terrible law by Trump, and Trump was very good on some of the Uyghur issues, but mostly Pompeo probably. But on that was a terrible thing to do. So those working for the International Criminal Court, I think, under the American provisions, would get arrested or would be committing a crime in America. So I don't think that's changed yet under Biden. So he'll definitely change that. But it'll be interesting to see if he moves towards the International Criminal Court in any way as well. And so that's kind of what we're stuck with. And there's a kind of move of the international system, because people are getting upset by the United Nations, I think, and people are moving outside of it. And the UK is acting a lot with countries like Canada, with the Commonwealth, because of this impasse at the United Nations. So that's something where international law is moving towards non-UN bodies in order to get around the problem with the United Nations.
Thank you so much, Michael. So we've had a few more questions. They're all brilliant. What I'll do is I'll move on to the next question I want to pose to both Michael and Joe, just because it will provide a bit more understanding about the Genocide Amendment, and then we'll ask those questions that you've submitted after those ones. So I'll start with you, Joe. Last Tuesday, there was a version of the Genocide Amendment that came before the House of Commons that was narrowly defeated. What was that version of the Genocide Amendment about? And then, Michael, if you could then talk about how this new version is different from that.
Yeah, so the first amendment passed the House of Lords back in December, and then it fell short, regrettably, in the House of Commons. That amendment is similar in some regards to the revised amendment. The original amendment allowed the High Court to make that determination of genocide, because that is key. But if the High Court made that determination of genocide, the High Court would revoke that bilateral trade agreement. Without trying to get into too much of the technicalities, it wouldn't necessarily revoke the agreement itself, that's recognised in international law, but certainly our obligations and engagement under that bilateral treaty would have been revoked. So if there is a determination of genocide, an action would consequence. Oh wait, Michael's going to take over to the revised amendment. I'll pass that over to Michael.
You can go on if you like. I'm just finding. I'm going to post a link so people can have a look at some of the Uyghur cases when they have time. Joe, I'll just jump in. The new one, as you've seen, I've popped it up there before, and you can find that online. We can send that around to you as well. What it does is it kind of allows the High Court to make a determination. It does require a motion to be sent to both houses of Parliament and to be debated there. So it does actually require that to happen, but it doesn't require a trade bill or negotiations to stop or a trade bill to be revoked. And there were lots of criticisms. Some of them you may think are false criticisms by people who don't actually want any mention or any court determination of genocide. And some of them may have been fair, coming from proper place about parliamentary sovereignty and the courts deciding on trade deals. So as you all know, in the British system, we have a huge part of it is about parliamentary sovereignty and Parliament doing what it can. And sometimes when you look at our Parliament, you might think, well, maybe that's not such a good thing, but that's a different argument. So there was those objections. So that the new amendment cleverly deals with those. So now if your MP votes against it, they're not doing it for parliamentary sovereignty reasons. And that's if I can say, that's absolute rubbish. And I've seen responses from MPs actually, and they're still saying it, and they're trying to use that. That's their most valuable tool: parliamentary sovereignty. So don't take that as an answer. It's not true now, because you've seen it there. They can still, if they wanted to, and the High Court made a determination of genocide, they could still make a bilateral trade deal with that country.
That's brilliant, Michael. And Joe, you often have really good points about this. So something that we're saying to people who we're encouraging to write to their MPs is that you will often get some very basic responses, that staple responses that they are sending out to their constituents to say why they cannot back this amendment. Joe, you've come across many of them. Could you please pick a couple of the most common ones and how the people here can tackle those comments by their MPs?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Michael's absolutely spot on to really highlight that point. The main difference between the old amendment and the new amendment is actually what role is the High Court playing and what role is Parliament playing. Originally, or had a big role, and there would also be revocation.
Joe, you're freezing up.
Michael has said, because of what arguments the government were making and they were advancing. Is this any better? Am I still?
You're still cracking up quite a bit, Joe.
Am I still frozen or?
You're still frozen. We can hear you, but it's breaking up.
Oh.
I'm not sure if turning off the camera.
Do you want to hand it over to Michael? I'll try.
I don't mind covering if you want to jump on and off again. Joe was just was saying about the differences here about the parliamentary sovereignty point. What Lawyers for Uyghur Rights, which is an organisation that I'm running at the moment as well. You can have a look at that, lawyersforuyghurrights.com. We sent out emails to all Conservative MPs, both those who voted for the amendment and against it, and those who abstained. There was quite a few abstentions as well. And they say one of the objections is Parliament should have the final say on trade deals, and they do have the final say on trade deals is kind of the answer to it. We can send these out to you as well, so you've got them. It's Parliament's final decision. And it's been a consistent position of the UK government, not just this government, but past governments as well, that it's a question for the courts whether genocide is taking place. And that makes sense. It's a legal question. And so if the government comes up with some kind of amendment of their own, which allows some kind of committee to look into it or something like that, that's not what they've been saying for years. So that's the first kind of objection we've come up against. Some people have been saying that our courts are not qualified to determine genocide, which is also a load of rubbish as well. Our courts are amongst the best in the world. They're empowered to determine genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, torture in criminal cases. So because of universal jurisdiction for some of these crimes, even if they happen overseas, they can come to the British courts. And there's been cases of war crimes, crimes against humanity brought against individuals in the United Kingdom. So our courts are already empowered to look into these kind of issues. So it's rubbish to say that they'd be unable to do so. Joe, do you want to jump in?
Am I back? It's all good. It wouldn't be a Zoom call if it didn't break up. But yeah, absolutely. I think in the first debate, the separation of powers arguments was a really strong argument the government were pursuing, and the one that hit home with most MPs. That is now dealt with. That should not legitimately be a concern now for Parliament. There are concerns, as Michael has said, about the competency of the High Court. For the reasons we've already explained, international courts are not available. The only available court, if the government is to have a workable policy, are UK courts, and the High Court is better suited. It already applies international law, and I think it's ironic, if I can say this, that the government has been pursuing this line of we don't want to have any say from foreign courts or international courts, and now they're saying, but our courts aren't up to the job. I think it's frankly missing the messaging that they've been putting out for some time now. One of the key things we noted from MPs in a lot of their correspondence was, well, we're not going to pursue a trade deal with China anyway, or genocidal countries, so what does it matter? The key point I would raise is that this amendment is the bare minimum what should be done. The government has said we're pursuing trade deals with, countries like New Zealand, Australia. These aren't risk countries. But my real response to that would be, so what does it matter if this amendment passes? It wouldn't have any impact on those trade agreements. What it would have an impact on is if any of our bilateral trading partners begin to commit genocide. And that's important. And it's a theme I've seen quite heavily used by MPs, is at the moment, this impact would have very little impact. But what I would say is that this amendment shouldn't just be focused on the here and now. It's a safety net going forward. If we have bilateral trade agreements with countries and in 10 years, 15 years time, those countries commit genocide, we should not be trading on preferential terms with those countries. So it's a safety net, it's an absolute bare minimum. And the one thing I would add, and there's actually 2 points I would raise before we move on, is that MPs and in some correspondence, this idea of judicial activism has already been raised. Now, one thing that I have said repeatedly on the judicial activism point is that if the courts were to take an activist attitude in this area, they would do so already. They wouldn't wait for this amendment to pass to say, right, lads, now's the time to take it upon ourselves and go absolutely AWOL and produce a load of common law. That would simply not happen. The amendment is really limited and specific. It applies only to genocide. It requires the application of international law. It is an exceptionally high threshold to meet. And if I may, I'll also just briefly answer Elena's question as well, which was near the beginning, about why governments, don't say it's genocide. And the reason is genocide is a crime. It is a crime under international law. For that determination to be made, it can only be made by a competent court applying international standards. And that isn't something, Michael and I are saying should happen at this briefing. That is government policy. And the reason, if I may just follow up on one of Michael's points as well, is there is concern that MPs or the government may start to renegade on this position, is that they may start to say, parliamentarians or select committees or other bodies may be able to make this determination. Now, if that was to happen and other bodies, political bodies, started to call out genocide and require a response from the government, do you know what the response from the government would be? This is not a political decision, it's a judicial decision. And in a circle we go. Only courts can make this determination. And MPs regrettably may be swayed that it's for Parliament to decide, but parliamentarians are not suited to apply international law. They're not lawyers and they're not judges. Only courts can do that, and that's what I would really stress in any correspondence with an MP.
It's a really good point, and one which is made well if you consider what happened in the dying days of the Trump presidency when Pompeo disclosed that they said what was happening was genocide and crimes against humanity, and which was a good thing, a major state doing that. But then you saw the Chinese response was, well, that's a political decision by biased politicians. So in effect, having the court making the determination rather than the politicians is protecting the politicians. They should be pleased about it because it stops China from going after them and saying that they're making political decisions because of their biases. So it is something which actually protects them to some extent. Tammy's put a very interesting post there. You can all have a look at it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that's from her MP who talks about separation of powers and that kind of thing. There is no breach of the separation of powers here. Our courts often make declarations on human rights of all kinds. So there's no separation of powers. They're not making law. They're not forcing the government to do anything. So really what these people are saying when they write to you, if you read it behind the lines, is we don't want anything, determining whether genocide is taking place. So it's a very interesting example of those responses you might receive.
The one thing that I found quite effective in framing this, just to build on Michael's point, is that really what this amendment does is it gives Parliament the ability to make an informed choice. At the moment, they cannot make an informed choice if a determination of genocide has not been made. And we've explained why internationally that's not possible. Now, if this amendment does not pass, we are denying Parliament the ability to have that information. They cannot give effect to any form of trade policy in respect of genocide without that information. This amendment allows Parliament to take an informed choice and to have genocide recognised as genocide. And I think that's really key, especially when it comes to parliamentary sovereignty and the power of Parliament. The power is with Parliament. Do they want to make their decisions based on ignorance or based on fact? That's what this amendment would do.
Thank you both. So we have some more questions. In case you haven't seen, Michael has put in a link about the work of Justice Abroad and some of the Uyghur and other Turkic clients that Michael and other people at Justice Abroad represent. So you can have a look at that in the chat. I'm going to move on to, so we answered Elena's question. So Flo Marks, I think it is. What level of evidence would the High Court need to make a definitive determination of genocide? Do you think it is likely there will be a clear declaration of genocide? Will it be difficult to collect evidence, considering a lot of that resides in China?
That's a very good question again, in regards to that. The definition of genocide, which we haven't really gone over, which is set out in the Genocide Convention, and you can go and have a look at that if you like. In Article 2, it's any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic or racial or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction of the group, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, which is the one we're probably looking at most in regards to what's happening at the moment, and forcibly transferring children of the group. So genocide is not something which is particularly easy to prove, because you need a special intent, and that's the intent to destroy in whole or in part, so the group. So it's not something, crimes against humanity, it just needs to be systematic and widespread, all those different types of offences. But for genocide, it's the crime of all crimes, so it's a higher standard there. Not easy to prove, but I think the High Court would be able to deal with it. In regards to evidence from China, the most interesting thing about China is they keep evidence themselves. So there's all kinds of Chinese documents which have come out showing the mass planning of detentions, and even showing that individuals are made to choose an offence that they're guilty of when they're brought into detention, showing the mass purchase of like cattle prods and things like that I mentioned earlier. And there's also evidence of Uyghurs who've managed to escape. And I've got videos of Uyghurs who've managed to escape, and some of them who've even worked doing forced abortions and sterilization, that kind of thing. So I don't think they'd have a problem with the evidence. When it started, people were saying, well, there's not much evidence coming out. There's lots of evidence coming out of China at the moment. So evidentially, I don't think it would be such a big problem. And can they make that determination? They make our courts make difficult determinations under the Human Rights Act in regards to torture, in regards to all kinds of things, and they work with all kinds of international treaties to give definitions to different things. So I don't think they'd have a problem doing it.
Just a few things that I just really quickly want to add just before we move on in regards to the amendment, particularly in respect of the scope of the amendment. So the amendment itself would not stop all trade with that country, and that is something that I really want to be key, because I know some MPs may raise this. The amendment relates to bilateral trade agreements. They're under the relevant agreements. Now, a bilateral trade agreement is an agreement that the UK has with another country. It does not include multilateral agreements. So, you know, if there are more than just us and them, if there are other parties involved, they're not even considered or within the scope of this amendment. It's purely bilateral. And the reason that's key is because bilateral trade agreements usually include preferential terms. So, you know, a free trade agreement, tariff-free, things like that. This amendment is limited in the sense that it would stop just the preferential terms, just trade on preferential terms. And that is really the bare minimum we're talking about. It's not for us to trade on preferential terms with genocidal state. Preferential terms are rewards. They are a marker of a good relationship with that country. You know, this is the bare minimum if we are to meet our obligations under the convention. So that is just something I really, really want to emphasize. It's the bare minimum, just trade on preferential terms and bilateral trade.
Fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much. I was wondering if either of you want to answer Jessica's question, which is on what has been the impact of a rise of public apathy to internationalism and globalism and an increase in nationalism and isolationism to Britain's contributions to issues of international justice and human rights? Joe? Oh, Michael, go for it.
No, Joe, you want to go first, or should I go first? I would just say that you know, the UK is still a respected player in international politics. It's part of the G7, G10, NATO, the Commonwealth, of course. So it is a respected player, and that's why I think it's so important that we kind of lead from the front. If we pass this amendment, then it's quite possible that some of our allies throughout the Commonwealth could do the same thing as well. You would have seen in regards to the Belarusian regime and sanctions there, the UK acted in concert with Canada, and there were sanctions on the regime there at exactly the same time. So this is really an opportunity for us to lead from the front. In regards to this kind of move towards more blinkered thinking and nationalism, the only thing I pick up which worries me, and especially in these debates, because I watched the whole debate on the amendment the other day and I was tweeting out some of what the MPs were saying, is this kind of dislike, and this, you could call it hate for courts, and it's really expressed by lots of the MPs and Conservative MPs, and that's something which I think is anti-conservative. It's wrong, and it shows a real stupidity just to be against courts. And courts, especially the courts in our country, we're very lucky to have objective courts which make decisions for the government, lots of the time make decisions against the government, lots of the time make decisions between private individuals. And this kind of relentless attack on the courts, I think, is dangerous, because people pick up on it and people will say, well, I don't trust the courts, they're political, this kind of thing. And it's a load of rubbish. It really is a load of rubbish. And there are people who are saying it who know that it's rubbish when they say it. Some of the parliamentarians who stood up and said these things about courts, they know it's not true. They're not saying it because they think it's true, and they're not saying it because they believe it. And it's quite dangerous, I think, to be making those kind of comments about courts, and to be doing it simply because you lost a few constitutional cases in the Supreme Court. It's really poor show. You know, we all lose fights. I lose cases, but I don't go and slag off our whole court system. I often lose cases. You know, it happens. The government lost a few cases, and they got what they wanted in the end, and they probably should have lost the constitutional cases anyway. But it just shows a real childlike behaviour to say, well, we're going to throw the toys out of the pram. We hate courts. Courts don't have any role in our society. Well, of course, the courts are one of the most important parts of a democratic society. So that's the only kind of that's the part of kind of small-mindedness and perhaps internal thinking which worries me more than anything else.
The one thing I would just quickly add on that is that the UK will often talk about its efforts internationally to promote human rights. And just before the amendment, Dominic Raab made an announcement about what the UK government will be doing in respect of this genocide against the Uyghurs. Of course, I didn't call it genocide. What I would say is that although we are perhaps showing an ambition, many MPs will say they support the ultimate aim. Ultimately, at the moment, we are exceptionally limited in what we're doing. And I think we're failing to recognise some deep flaws internationally, or indeed what we could be doing to take effective action. And if I may, this sort of leads on to the question that follows Jess's, which is from Anushka, about how would this influence the UN. If this amendment passes and we make determinations, this would be groundbreaking internationally. It would show a real initiative on the behalf of the state to be proactive in acknowledging and undertaking its obligations under the Genocide Convention. At the moment, states are primarily reactive. They wait for genocide to happen. They wait for atrocities to occur before we start to even talk about judicial or legal intervention. This would be proactive. You know, we would get there first. We are prepared to look at a case, make that determination of genocide, and then act accordingly. So I certainly think that the UK has shown sort of an ambition internationally, but also a deep reservation in the actions it takes. And this amendment, I hope, would not only take that one step forward, but encourage other states and other countries to do the same.
Fantastic, Joe and Michael, thank you so much for that. So I'm seeing a few questions that seem to touch on similar things, so I think I'll just sort of join them up, which is sort of how can we help? or how are we going to make these arguments to communities or to the press, or what can really be done to fix this? And also one question on when the actual debate is. So I was wondering if either of you would like to field that one.
People often say, well, how can we help? We can't do anything, but it's great you've turned up to this. Please get involved with Yet Again, who've organized this event. They're doing some really good work as well. So follow them, get involved with them. I think youth movements can be really powerful. You know, I'm part of lots of committees in regards to human rights, but it's people like you who can really make a change and can get out there. And one thing to note is, I've lost the name of the shop, but there's a British high street brand who stopped using cotton from Xinjiang region, and there was a small group of protesters who went every week and protested outside their shop. I think it was every Friday they went there. So they actually made a difference in the end. I don't know, there was 5 or 6 of them who just went there every week. Maybe some people involved who are listening to this. So you can make a difference. You can go out there and protest. You can write to your MP. You can get involved with your religious group or non-religious group, or and really lobby there, because MPs care what their voters think. They care more what they think than what I think. So they care what their constituents think, because they're worried about losing elections. So if all of you looked at who your MP was and saw how they voted, and if they voted against, then don't write too rudely to them, but just suggest that that's what you're interested in, that you do care about this. The more emails they get saying, I do care about this, I'm watching what you do, the better it is. So there are all those things that you can do. Talk about the issue, hold something in your university about Uyghurs, get in touch with us. We can organize Uyghur people to kind of help out as well. The more information there is about what's happening, the better. I posted on before the Justice Abroad website, just the news section. There's lots of news there about non-Uyghur cases, that we've got about 5 different lots of clients. And the best thing about them, and I might play a video of one of the clients, which is about 2 minutes, but I think it gives you a bit more perspective about what's going on. So we've got 5 clients. They've got family outside of China, so they've come to us to help them in regards to lobbying the UN, that kind of thing, on their cases. They come from all different parts of Uyghur society. You know, some of them are billionaire property moguls, others are local shopkeepers. We've got people who worked as a forestry manager for 40 years. So these really different people. So go on there and have a look at them, and you can write about them, you can talk about them. If anyone here said, oh, I'm really interested in this particular case, would you put me in touch? I want to talk to the family members. They'd be really happy to speak at your university or your school or your political group. So have a look at them and get in contact with me, because they're really happy to talk about what they're doing. And I might just play this video. This is a really interesting video, and it just it gives you a bit of a break from listening to me speak. This is Nurse Mangal yesterday. There's 2 sisters, Nurse Man and Nurse Mangal. Nurse Man, she works for Radio Free Asia in Washington, which is the only only independent Uyghur language radio program. So they do great work there. Her sister lives in, or escaped, and it lives in Turkey, in Istanbul. And yesterday she was invited by the opposition party in Turkey to address parliament. And she started speaking, and Turkish parliament TV cut her off and went to kind of like a blank screen thing, like you'd see in China when they discuss international news that the Chinese don't like. So that actually gave it lots of publicity, and she speaks really well. So I asked her to do a video for you guys today, and I will play it now. It's very short, but I thought it'd be nice if you heard from her. Hopefully I can make it a bit. Oh yeah.
Hi, my name is Nursman Abdurrashid, and I am one of the Uyghurs who are desperately seeking justice for their family members who are arbitrarily detained in Chinese concentration camps. I lost contact with my family members since 18th of June 2017. After 3 years, on 15th of June 2020, I learned that all of my family members are in prison. This is my father, Abdurrashid Tohti. He is 55 45 years old. He is sentenced 16 years, 11 months. She's my mother, Tajikul Qadir. She is 52 years old. She is sentenced 13 years. And this is my elder brother, Ahmed Jan Abdurrashid, 34 years old. He is sentenced 7 years. And this gentleman, he is my younger brother. He is 30 years old. He is sentenced 15 years, 11 months. Yes, if you hear me, my beautiful family just torn apart by Chinese regime. They are launching genocide against my people. I just want to say, memorizing Holocaust and genocide not enough. Please stop it. If you really mean never again. Thank you.
So as you can see, that it gives a bit of perspective and is very powerful from her. You can have a Google and you'll see her speech in the Turkish Parliament. It's in Turkish, so you might not be able to understand it, but it was them cutting her off, and whether that was the ruling party who decided to do that in Turkey or not, it's possible, gave it lots of publicity.
Joe, do you want to say something, or I was going to quickly weigh in?
Just very, very quickly, just about when you're making contact with your MPs. So it is vital, so important that we try to reach as many MPs as possible, particularly Conservative MPs. So if you're in a Conservative constituency, if your university is near a Conservative constituency, please do try and mobilise as much support as possible to reach out. There's a really key reason why. Not just sending emails, but I would also recommend, which is what we're doing now, actually asking to talk to your MP. The vote is on the 9th of February. So, you know, you've got some time now to send an email, try to organise that call. The reason being is Conservative MPs are being whipped against this amendment, and they're being whipped exceptionally hard. So for many MPs, there's a lot of pressure of them to just go with the government and vote against this amendment. And many MPs simply either don't understand the amendment, they struggle to understand the implications within international law. We need to reach out to these MPs so they're confident in rebelling, and that's what's key. It's why we're trying to hold these briefings. It's to really get you on board, to understand a bit more of the intricacies of the amendment, why it's there, to understand some effective rebuttals. You know, I spoke to my MP ahead of the previous debate, and they were able to talk about, you know, common things we've mentioned about parliamentary sovereignty and so forth, but address them. You know, if you can meet those concerns or reservations, it will be exceptionally powerful. And, you know, we don't need that many more. We had, I think it was 33 or 34 who rebelled. We needed a further 11. And so, you know, it's doable. And particularly now the strongest argument has been dropped. So please, please, please reach out and ask for conversations with your MP.
So it was a margin of 11. So if you had six more on our side, so that really explains how close it is, because it was 11. If 6 of those 11 were on our side, then we would have won. So that's how close it is. And there are lots who abstained, who may be able to say now, well, there's no breach of parliamentary sovereignty, so I can vote for it. But they really do. Joe's right. They really do need you to reach out. And I think Joe and Eve and Jaya are coordinating things in regards to who to contact. So I'm happy for you guys to contact them. They're doing a really good job. So please do contact them and keep in touch with them as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael, and thank you so much, Joe. If I could just quickly say a few things for how you can help. So effectively, we want to give you as many resources as possible, so that you can write to your MP and call your MP and properly hold them accountable. So one of the things that you can do is, I'm not sure if Jay has put the link in the group so far, is that there is already an email template of a letter, and effectively you just need to put your postcode in and that automatically generates an email. Share that with every single person you know. Share it with every network, every Facebook group you're in, every family WhatsApp group. Make everyone write to their MP. The more people that write in, the better. Secondly, get on the phone, as Joe said. We're going to write a script and we're going to distribute that to student activists specifically, so that if you've never called your MP before and you're nervous about it, you will have you will have, you know, sort of guidelines for what kinds of things you can say, because, you know, we want to give you all the steps to basically best prepare yourself. We're going to send a plain text briefing document to everyone as soon as possible, so that, you know, a lot of this like legal jargon can be pretty complicated, but that shouldn't be a barrier to engaging with politics or with politicians. So we want to put it as easily as possible for everyone to understand. And secondly is work with your communities. You know, get your synagogue or your mosque or your church to lobby as an organization. There is currently you know, attempts to compile letters between different organizations. So if your church in your constituency wants to do this and they reach out to me or I give them, you know, give them my contact details, we can arrange for a mass text, for a mass letter from all of the different religious groups in that constituency to lobby their MP as one. And, you know, this is about, you know, collective like action. You know, one person's voice is not particularly helpful, but, you know, if you get entire communities to put pressures on MPs, that is very helpful. You know, they work for you, you know. So at the end of the day, if they feel like they are not going to be re-elected if they vote against this bill, this amendment, they will have much more incentive to vote in favour of it. And lastly, I think the most important the thing that I wanted to bring up here is that many of you are currently part of the Stop Uyghur Genocide Student Ambassador Programme. And thank you very much to everyone who is a student ambassador for coming. But if you are not, we are currently recruiting student ambassadors from universities across the country. This would give you an opportunity to get involved in Uyghur activism generally, not specifically around this amendment, but it would help if, you know, being involved in this amendment stuff as well. Please do email me or message me on Twitter or any social media if you want to get involved. We're actively recruiting and we would love to have you, and that would be fantastic. So thank you. That was my 2 cents.
Eva, as well, if any of you either from this session have further questions or you get a reply from an MP and you're not quite sure how to respond, or there's something you want to look at a bit further, my DMs are open on Twitter. I'm either happy to respond to messages. If you'd like to call, I'm happy to call. You know, it's an open offer. I'm here to work with you as much as possible between now and the debate.
Perfect. And I'd also like to add, in terms of a time frame that we're working towards, we're expecting this amendment to come before the House of Commons second week of February. So really, it's not a lot of time. So we are, all efforts are really appreciated. I cannot tell if I've cracked. Can you guys hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we are working to quite a tight limit. The government are going to go very, very hard on this, so we need to go even harder. So please do contact your MP, get groups involved. As Joe and Eve have said, you know, we are all here to help. So find us on social media, give us an email. We're happy to speak to you on the phone, support you however we can. We hope you've learned a lot from this. We hope that if your MP gives you a rubbish reply, you can say, actually, I know better than this, and you can challenge them. So thank you so much for your time. You know, I know the Uyghur community especially really appreciate this, and we can try and be a force for positive change. So that's all from me. Michael, Joe, do you have any final words before we end the call?
Just finally, thank you all for coming. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Yet Again, which is a very recently started organisation which is doing fantastic things. Please keep in touch with them, and thank you for your work with them. I've put email address there, contact@justiceabroad.co.uk. If you're interested in any of the stories you find on the website in the news section, and then do reach out to me. I'm happy to put you in touch with any of the Uyghur people or their families who are all around Europe and in North America as well. So please do keep in touch.
Yes, just thank you, everyone. You know, all our efforts hopefully will make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think I'm going to end the call here. If you want, sorry, I saw someone just asked me really quickly. If you want to email me, just email me at eve.napius at WUCongress.org. So that's the best way to get me. And thanks everyone for coming, and have a lovely evening. And I look forward to hearing from you very soon.